Five Nights at Freddy's as a zombie apocalypse story probably sounds like a pretty weird concept. And to be honest, it kinda just came about as I was trying to think of a way to do a FNAF video where I could turn the animatronics into humans. This idea crossed my mind and I didn't really take it seriously at first, but as some of the story ideas started falling into place, I thought, FNAF actually can transition pretty smoothly into a zombie story. Plus it gave me an excuse to do some creepy zombie designs as well as some post-apocalypse survivor designs. So I hope you'll go with me on the weirdness of this one and enjoy a FNAF zombie story. Let's go! Hit like if you want, subscribe if you feel like, but either way, enjoy the show. Not many will ever truly know how the end of modern civilization came about. When the first zombies emerged in 2027, there were already so many so quickly that humanity never stood a chance. The infection swept across the planet like a tidal wave and left few people unaffected or unharmed. I believe the most shocking thing to most people would be that it was all started by one man, Dr. William Afton. Afton was a bioengineer who had worked for a secret government organization developing viruses to be used as weapons, but had been fired for always taking his creations and experiments too far, threatening his co-workers' lives and risking lab leaks far too often. His employers had also gotten a sense that he had a certain contempt for humanity, which was particularly dangerous in his line of work. After being let go, he'd essentially gone underground for a few years, and few heard from him. The only person he stayed in contact with was an old friend of his from work named Henry Emily. Henry had seen that William was a somewhat disturbed individual, but also saw good in him. Afton was always good with children, and Henry took that as a sign of a decent person. Afton had, on rare occasions, come to Henry's home for dinner, and Henry's daughter, Charlotte, had always gotten along well with William. William even eventually shifted career paths and opened a small, family-friendly restaurant where he'd hire nightly musical entertainment, getting acts from local bands. Henry and Charlotte became regular patrons of the restaurant and always enjoyed one of the frequent acts that went by Freddy and the Boys. The band was very popular with kids, and often Charlotte would go to the front and dance around to the music with the other children. Unfortunately, this would put her out of her father's reach on the night that Afton set his twisted plan in motion. You see, he hadn't spent those years between careers just twiddling his thumbs. He'd been planning something. The night before it all went down, Afton had taken Freddy from the band for a drink, framing it as an excuse to simply praise Freddy for his wonderful performances. But secretly, Afton had laced Freddy's beverage with a compound he'd developed, one far more dangerous than anything he'd made at his prior job. By the following evening, Freddy was feeling hot and woozy, but he had a stoic work ethic and still smiled through it as he took the stage that night. He was playing his heart out despite how he felt, but almost precisely 24 hours after drinking his laced drink, something broke in Freddy. His eyes glazed over red, he stopped singing and just began to groan. The music ceased. People tried to ask him what was wrong, but Freddy was no longer in there. He let out a guttural shriek and leapt onto one of the children in the audience and bit right into their neck, sending everyone into a panic. Some adults lunged forward and grabbed him off the kid, but as soon as they did, the child's eyes went red, and he too started lunging at other kids and biting them. Within moments, there were a dozen infected people sprinting around the restaurant attacking. Of course, Henry was horrified, but his priority was getting to Charlotte. Sadly, he couldn't find her anywhere. Partway through his search, he too was bitten and infected. He never learned the truth of what had happened that night, that Afton had lured a group of 6 children, including Charlotte, down into a bunker below the restaurant, claiming they'd be safe there, though this too was all part of his plan. He locked them in with him as he watched at the top of the stairs through a window to the horror partaking in the restaurant. He was in twisted glee, seeing that the event, remembered now as the bite of 27, had gone exactly as Afton had planned. Unfortunately for the rest of the world, this was only a small fragment of what Afton had done that day. Afton's goal had not simply been to start an infection in his own city. He wanted it to ravage the world. He thought humans were becoming weak and lazy with all our modern conveniences and wanted a way for the whole planet to start over. He kept a few groups of children alive to raise himself, intending to make them strong and resilient in a way he believed kids not to be anymore. That was why he'd taken the kids into the bunker that night. But as you can imagine, one outbreak wouldn't necessarily guarantee his virus would spread to the rest of the world. He'd put something much bigger into play that same day as the bite in his restaurant. That same compound Afton had given Freddy, he'd earlier that day leaked into the waterways at the Los Angeles International Airport. Anyone who drank from the water fountains there, and even many who simply washed their hands, had become infected. Many of those people soon after hopped onto airplanes to head across the planet. The virus had been brilliantly planned by Afton to kick in after 24 hours for those who ingested it. That way, many could get all the way to the opposite side of the world before they turned. But, for those bitten, the infection would work its horrors almost immediately. All across the planet, the infected people arrived home or on vacation to other countries and turned. There was no time to prepare or understand what was going on or figure out a way to contain it. Within a month, projections assumed that over 1 billion people had already become infected, and there was no way of slowing it down. The world as we knew it was over. Afton's compound effectively killed those infected, but would alter their bodies and minds in a way to keep their corpse mobile after the person's death, leaving them as soulless, ravenous fiends that sought only to hunt and eat. During their first week after turning, they'd warp more and more, with their skin rotting, their teeth growing and sharpening, and even making the person larger and stronger. Many would come to refer to them as zombies, but the kids in Afton's bunker who had seen the horror of that first night and would have terrible recurring dreams about it would come to call those afflicted nightmares. The kids spent the first month in the bunker crying and trying to leave, but eventually Afton wore them down and convinced them that the world as they knew it was gone, and that he was essentially their father now. This bunker that they resided in for the next 12 years was well equipped with food, beds, and even a training facility and library. Afton would teach the kids and train them physically to be ruthless fighters, claiming they'd need to be strong to survive in the outside world someday. But into their teen years, the group grew very impatient as to when someday would actually be. They'd never been allowed to leave the bunker, but Afton himself would sometimes leave for days at a time, taking a van he had and claiming that he was out looking for supplies, but he never allowed any of the group to help him search. They also started asking more and more questions about how the infection had begun. Of course, he'd told them nothing about his own role in the whole ordeal, but they thought it suspicious how that first night in his restaurant had gone down. One of the girls in particular, Susie, who'd gained the nickname Chica due to a beak-like gas mask she often wore, eventually convinced the others that they needed to break into the one room in the bunker that they'd never seen inside of. Afton's room. It took some strategizing as the room had both a combination lock and fingerprint scanner, but they were able to get all they needed, and the next time Afton left, they waited an hour to ensure he was truly gone, then broke in. He had documents and maps and even vials of the virus. After an hour of reading, they'd learned all about his treacherous actions, that he'd started the infection, and that he actually had other bunkers across the city with more children he was trapping and training. They could have spent days going through all his documents, but after an hour in there, they heard the door to the bunker burst open again. Afton was back already. The kids hadn't realized that Afton had a camera in his room connected to his watch, so the second they broke in, he'd been alerted and turned back. Of course, at that point, it was all too late. Luckily for the kids, Afton had a wide array of weaponry in his room. He had guns, grenades, bats, swords, even a rocket launcher. The kids all armed up quickly and aimed at Afton as he stormed in. He was furious, but doing his best to conceal it. He ran through a whole gamut of fake emotions, trying to convince the kids to drop their weapons, trying to make his actions sound as reasonable as possible, but they weren't buying it. With all they'd just learned, none of them wanted anything to do with Afton anymore, and the ruthlessness he'd trained into them was suddenly turned against him. They forced Afton out of the bunker, and after a few minutes of figuring out how to work the vehicle, they drove out until they found a small swarm of nightmares. They kicked him out of the car and closed the door. Some of them wanted to stay to watch the mayhem, but in spite of everything, he'd still raised them for the last 12 years. After seeing him bitten once, they drove off to one of the other locations of his bunkers, though Chica could have sworn she heard Afton laughing as they drove away. After half an hour, they got to the next location, but had to search for a while to find the actual entrance, hidden in an old pizza place. They brought papers with all of Afton's lock combinations, and soon enough, they were able to open the hidden door. Seconds after they did, a somewhat manic-looking woman, a bit older than them all, wearing a helmet with rabbit ears, looked up the stairs at them coming down. She immediately ran for the kitchen. They tried to tell her that they were there to help, thinking she too may have been trapped by Afton, but as they turned into the kitchen, she lunged at them with a knife, yelling for the others to come help her. A group looking much closer to their age ran in, but Chica and her friends quickly disarmed the woman and told them all that Afton had been lying to them, quickly elaborating on his horrific actions. Luckily, most of this new group was easily convinced, as they too had all grown very suspicious and uneasy about Afton. All except for Vanessa. You see, Vanessa, the one who just attacked with the knife, had been in her teen years before the bite of 27. She shared Afton's ideals of a new, more resilient humanity forged in a dangerous world. She'd eagerly agreed to be an aide to Afton after he commenced the apocalypse, staying at this bunker to keep an eye on the kids here when he was gone. Needless to say, neither of these groups saw her as an ally after this revelation. They bound her to a chair as the two groups got to know each other a bit. Roxanne was the most talkative of the group. She was the eldest from her bunker, besides Vanessa, and they all called her either Roxy or the Wolf, for her fang-like teeth, agility as a fighter, and her weirdly good sense of smell. Chica and her friends also helped Roxy's group break into Afton's room in this bunker, where they found even more weapons. With both groups armed, they all headed up to pile into the van and go to the other location on Afton's map. But as they got outside, they saw a tall, broad, bleeding figure stumbling up to the pizza place.
You can't get rid of me that easily.
It's still unclear how Afton had maintained some sentience. In all his notes and documents, there was ample evidence to show that he'd made the virus incurable and unstoppable. And yet, despite having been bitten and showing all the signs of a turned nightmare, he was still able to speak. Something a nightmare certainly should not be able to do.
I will always come back. You may not recognize me at first, but I assure you, it's still me.
On top of being taller and more muscular, his skin was turning purple under his faded yellow attire, and no matter how many bullets they riddled him with, he just kept coming. He charged at the kids and lunged jaw first at Chica. She dodged aside and struck him dead in the head with a bat, but he just kept coming like it was nothing.
This is my world now, and it could have been yours too.
They kept laying into him with all they had, but as bloodied and battered as he got, he wasn't going down. Worse still, the longer he tried to bite them, the more furious he became. Soon he let out an echoing shriek that seemed to call a whole wave of nightmares towards them. It was like he could control them. Their time to fight was up. They managed as a group to get him into the pizza place and shove him down the stairs into the bunker, then barricade the doors. They fought through the wave of nightmares Afton had just lured in and managed to reach the van. They drove off, plowing through nightmares as they went, not yet sure about where to go, just knowing they had to get away. They were left simply to wonder, was Afton really still in there somehow? Chica claimed that his eyes were just as dead-looking as the other infected, like his soul had gone, but his cruel mind was still more alive than most nightmares. Regardless, they knew it was likely they hadn't seen the last of him. They'd locked him away with Vanessa. Would he bite her as well, or could he even be of sound enough mind to keep her uninfected to aid in his escape? They could have asked questions for hours, but Chica knew they didn't have much way of getting answers where they were. Plus, they had a more pressing matter to attend to. There was still another bunker, likely holding within it more of them trapped and in need of rescuing, and maybe there would be some answers in their bunker. The group did their best to ignore all their burning questions for the moment and simply appreciated that they were finally free to roam the world as they saw fit. They drove off to the final bunker, one that Afton had down in his notes as the sister location. So, was this as weird as you thought, or once you heard the story, do you think it worked a little bit better? Let me know in the comments. And of course, let me know if there's other stuff you want me to do with FNAF characters, if you want another episode of this, or if you want me to put some other stuff in a post-apocalyptic setting. I'm super into that idea because I really love post-apocalypse style outfit designs. And if you're new to the channel and you want more Five Nights at Freddy's stuff, I've done a whole series of the animatronics as mech armors, which has a bit more of a comedic tone, and animatronics as dragons, which is more on the creepy, serious sort of side. But besides that, that's all for today, except of course for ending this video on some kind of positive or inspiring note, and the thought I want to leave people with today is an idea that I heard this week from the author James Clear, who says that every action is a vote towards becoming the person you want to be. I'll translate the example into a more art-specific idea. If you sit down right now and draw one hand in a weird sort of position that you've never done before, that itself is not going to make you suddenly good at drawing hands, but it is a vote in the direction of becoming someone who is better at drawing those. It's like a drop in the bucket. It's not going to fill the bucket, but it is helping fill it. Sort of mixed metaphors there, but hopefully you got the idea. I hope that's inspiring to someone out there. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. I love you all, and I'll see you all in the next episode on Monday.